So alongside the regular YouTube videos, I wanted to do something more low-key, some response videos. They're easier to make, so I can make more of them and I can do them alongside the current essay. So here's episode 1 of whatever I decide to name this series. Today we're looking at the Cyberpunk Dinos, the mass immigration crisis pushing Australia to collapse video, currently sitting at over 200k views, clearly something that's resonated with a lot of people. So let's see if it holds up, let's see if Australia is on the verge of collapse because of mass immigration.
It's a place where the dream used to be simple. Work hard, buy a house, and maybe wrestle a crocodile for good measure. But these days, you save, you're ready, and then show up to a rental inspection, only to realize it's less an inspection and more like auditioning for the Hunger Games.
Right off the bat, almost every video on housing and Australia starts off by saying this exact same thing every time. Go to any video on housing and most of them will start by saying, back in the day, housing was great, but now it's all gone to shit. Like, come on. But if you had to pinpoint it, the best time to try and own a home was in the 1960s, when Liberal Prime Minister Robert Menzies successfully increased the home ownership rate by over 20 percentage points from about 50% to over 70%. This was done through a highly regulated lending system, through incredibly generous subsidies to home buyers and towards constructing homes. All the while, he liberalized the migration system, so he let more people into the country. So his government was very much involved in shifting and doctoring housing to the outcome that he saw fit. This, however, was the actual groundwork for the insidiousness of the housing market today. Menzies would spend government money on these houses and home buyer grants and then sell it as a private product or commodity to people as their own asset. They basically, here is your house, this is your primary asset now. Explicitly, Menzies saw this as a way to make Australia a society of little capitalists. What that means is all of a sudden, you have over half the population who have a specific vested interest in the value, speculative or real, of their property, of their real estate. And that means more people are going to vote for policies that increase the value of their home. And conversely, it makes people docile and apathetic towards arguably needed, yet radical change, which may devalue their property. And this is very conducive with conservative politics. He saw this as a way to permanently solidify the Liberal Party vote, and the Labor Party's kind of followed that instead of tried to fight it. They've kind of played along. So not only do a majority of voters vote in the interests of their home increasing in value, but it gets to the point that, nowadays, where even if we wanted to devalue the housing market, the economy would collapse. It's very insidious, and anyone pointing to or alluding to this era as when Australia was good is, ironically, advocating for the foundations of the problems we see today. It was a good era to buy a house. It's not a sustainable way to distribute housing to people. But regardless, sorry for the long intro. Let's. It annoys me so much every time I hear this point of like, oh, back in the day, it was great, it was amazing. It's just a vibe. It's not based on anything. But let's get to the actual video.
Australia has experienced the largest decline in living standards in the developed world. According to the OECD, real hourly wages have fallen by 4.8% and real disposable income is down by 2%. Compare that to countries like the United States, where disposable incomes rose by 9.3%, or the OECD average increase of 7.7%. While much of the developed world has moved forward, Australia is sliding backward. Australia is in fact in a per capita recession right now.
So yes, Australia's economic situation is pretty shit. The balance sheet looks great from a government perspective, but in terms of a person by person basis, per capita is going backwards. Real wages have only just began to rise again. They've fallen to, I think, 2009 levels. Like, it's pretty bad. So then why are our real wages, why is GDP per capita falling compared to a country like the US where that isn't happening, as Dingo says? Well, Dingo would have you believe it's because of immigration, as he'll later argue in the video. But then he points to a positive example in the US, where in the graph he showed, it was comparing real wage growth from 2019 to 2024, which would encapsulate the entirety of the Biden presidency. And look, maybe he's a diehard Biden fan, but I wouldn't expect Dingo to admit to his audience that Biden had a conservative migration approach and therefore maintained real wage growth and real GDP per capita growth. Just a hunch I have based on this guy's content. But no, it clearly isn't because of immigration. Clearly, it's because of a differing approach from our respective reserve banks. The US's reserve bank went harder earlier and then tapered off a little bit. Our reserve bank took a bit of time and then has kept interest rates kind of hovering at about 4.3% or whatever. And that has created a situation where Australia did upshoot in terms of real wages, you can see on the graph initially, and then it's declined as other respective OECD countries have relaxed their monetary policies. So I think personally, this is a big judgment error on the part of our Reserve Bank because inflation wasn't caused by demand factors. And so curtailing demand, there's no excess demand to curtail. So you're just hurting households at that point, which will eventually bring back inflation as it has, but you're doing more damage. You're doing more harm than good in this instance. Inflation was caused by supply bottlenecks after COVID and as a result, declining capital labor ratios, declining productivity. And so you can see in our economy, the private sector has declined where the public sector has grown, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. I'd rather not be in a recession. But this is one big reason why our disposable income, real wages, GDP per capita, all that stuff has gone backwards in Australia later compared to other countries, particularly the US. It's just a different, and in my view, a mistake in their approach. Now, does that mean that the current government holds no water, no responsibility for what's happening? Absolutely not. They're not necessarily causing the problem, but they're not really doing that much to fix it either. So they hold a lot of responsibility in terms of responding to the present crises. There are commendable things the government has done, but overwhelmingly, it's just not nearly ambitious enough to really address the problems that we face. And just to hit that harder, I think that the government's lack of action is reprehensible, and necessarily they're perpetrating the crises that ultimately we suffer from. Inaction ultimately is inaction in and of itself.
Australia's population has seen record growth in the past few years, and it's not because of more babies, no. In 2023, the population increased by around 650,000 people, some of the highest annual growth since the 1950s. To put this into context, this is bigger than the total populations of Canberra, Hobart, and Darwin combined.
This sounds like a way bigger deal than it actually is. There was a record number of immigrants that came into the country in 2022, 2023, 2024, but there was a population dip. If you look at the little graph that he flashed up, there was a population dip during COVID, which meant that the overflow of immigrants, you could say, or the increased amount of immigrants that came after COVID actually compensated for the amount of immigrants that would have came anyway if COVID hadn't happened. In fact, there's been research done into this. If COVID didn't happen and we just kind of stayed at regular migration levels, we actually would have had more people in the country. And you can criticize that, but to suggest that this is completely abnormal, this is out of the ordinary, this is insane. No, this is not. This is actually completely within reality before COVID.
There's this propaganda that permeates Australian politics, especially the left wing, that unfettered immigration, especially from international students, has no negatives. Apparently, they're all high quality, highly skilled individuals who seemingly exist in a magic vacuum that requires no additional healthcare, infrastructure, and other social services. This is pure fantasy. Remember that previous rental price graph I brought up earlier? Now, let's overlay that with the temporary visa holders in Australia. Almost a perfect match.
I don't know anyone who thinks that immigrants, much less on the left, by the way, who think people need no or less infrastructure or healthcare. Famously a left-wing position. People don't need healthcare. Look, if you can find one tweet of someone saying immigrants are in a magic bubble and they don't need extra infrastructure or healthcare or housing, sure, I'll give it to you. But anyway, the actual point he's making about rent increases and student visa holders. So he kind of shows you the two graphs, and then he superimposes them on each other, and it looks fantastic. It looks very convincing. Until you actually look at the graphs and you see that the price of units and rents and stuff, it begins to increase well before student visa holders increase. So and it increases dramatically before student visa increases happen. If you look, increase in rents really begins to uptick and go up substantially in about mid 2021 to the start of 2022, whereas the increase in temporary visa holders only really kicks up in mid 2022 or even the start of 2023. So like, even if you want to play this little silly correlation causation game, it doesn't even work. It doesn't work. And it's really funny because these people, obviously Dingo, but also Leith and onselen, these people will play these silly correlation games. But when you actually like look at the graphs, they never match up. They never actually match up. It's really funny. I can't believe this video has 200,000 views, and I guess one person now has picked up the fact that the narrative doesn't suit. Oh, sorry. I'm so bewildered. The graphs don't suit the narrative. The numbers don't suit the narrative. So who would have thought?
Unfortunately, supply cannot keep up. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, despite having the 4th highest rate of home building in the developed world, Australia still cannot keep up with the soaring demand. There are a number of reasons for the hampered supply side of the housing market. One, the obvious increase in construction costs following the pandemic. The other are structurally higher interest rates.
So I actually agree with some of the things he's saying here, although firstly, supply has kept up with demand and exceeded demand. The number of households that are formed is still under the dwellings that have been completed. So we do have more supply in the market. So that would suggest that there is a distribution problem, not necessarily a scarcity problem. Furthermore, there's a difference between there isn't enough supply because we can't, and there isn't enough supply because we won't. There is plenty of spare productive capacity, materials, all that stuff to go around in the economy. The problem, as Dingo rightly points out, is it's just gone up in price. And so the relatively fragmented residential building market, is unable to keep up with rising costs and rising interest rates. And so many building companies are going defunct. What should happen to bolster supply is that the government should take a more affirmative, authoritative, ambitious approach to bolster supply, to really get in there and make sure that houses are being built like what happened in the 1960s. However, they shouldn't sell them on the private market. They should be kept in public hands. They should be kept in public hands so that they don't become this asset that entrenches Australia, the future Australians, in this, ball and chain scenario where we're just stuck to the housing market forever. We need to decouple from the housing market. So we have the ability to build it if we, want to, as a country, as a government, whatever. But the way in which it's set up right now, supply is hampered, and that's a problem.
Many experts argue that these deals undermine Australia's sovereignty.
For a big chunk of the video, he kind of goes over the growing relationship between India and Australia. And to be honest, it has no real relevance. There's no real affirmative arguments. There's no evidence given that it impacts the cost of living for Australians in that chunk of the section. It's mainly just vague gesturing at, India influence in Australia, whatever, not to do with Australians' cost of living. The main reason why I highlighted this specific clip is because he goes, experts say this, and then has one particular person who has a degree. Before, it was quite funny because he was saying the academic class, they want to stuff this country full of immigrants, but now it's experts say this. It's just, and it's leith and onselen. It's ridiculous.
And then there are the ghost colleges. These institutions barely exist. They're nothing more than empty classrooms with a few bored staff members scrolling on their computers. The real business here is in education. It's selling backdoor immigration and work rights to international students.
Now, Dingo goes on in the rest of the video to kind of talk about how there's a significant portion of the amount of students that are coming into the country who are going to these ghost colleges or doing these, useless degrees or whatever they actually aren't doing, all that stuff. And that is a real problem. I agree with him. But in my view, it's entirely a problem of regulation. It's entirely a problem of labor exploitation. It's not a problem of immigration per se as a principle. Eliminate the scams, we could do all that stuff, and we could accommodate for people who want to come here and work, come here and become educated, all that stuff, right? That's not a problem with immigration, that's a problem with the system of immigration that we've implemented, which I think is a valid criticism to have, because Well, we don't want to be scammed. Immigrants don't want to be scammed. Their families don't want to be scammed. You know, it's a win-win for all if we actually deal with the issue as opposed to blaming and scapegoating individual migrants or students or whatever. That doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, this whole video of just like, you know, blaming these systemic problems on immigrants, it's just he doesn't back it up at all. He just kind of alludes to it and assumes that you agree with him already. And that's silly in my view. At the end of the video, he kind of goes on this rant about the NDIS, and I don't know where it fits in. I think he's saying that, you know, all these immigrants are coming in, they're doing these fake degrees, and then they're getting jobs, fake jobs, that pay really well, the NDIS on the taxpayer's dime. Now, that is that's a whole leap of logic from the kind of, well, there are some immigrants who go to these relatively small ghost colleges, and then they use that as an excuse to stay in the country and work and then send remittances home. Like, that's such a leap of logic to suggest the entire immigration system is geared towards fake degrees, and then those fake degrees allow immigrants to work in the NDIS, which then extracts value from the Australian. It's just a whole thing that isn't backed up once, right? And the other thing I'd say about the NDIS is was it 2 billion? I'll correct myself in post, but I think it was 2 billion out of the however many tens of billions of dollars that are put into the NDIS that are actually found to be fraudulent. And again, if you actually research the NDIS and looked into the stuff and whatever, you'd find that for every dollar put in the NDIS, you get like, I think it was $2 back. So it doesn't seem that Australia is collapsing because of mass immigration. These are different conversations. One conversation is there are problems with the migration system, with the university sector. There are perverse incentives there. There are, you know, things we need to fix there. That's a different conversation, and it's a massive leap to go from that to this is ruining society. This is causing collapse, right? That is a huge leap to make. And Dingo makes no effort to make that leap at all. He kind of just alludes to these different things, as I said. Doesn't put the effort to actually make that determination. So it wasn't a very well made video. Didn't convince me that Australia is collapsing because of mass immigration. Talks about some big problems in the immigration system, but again, very different conversation and a big leap from immigration is collapsing this country. Anyway, that's been me. Let me know if you like this more casual type of video. I don't know, it's something new. I'm trying. I feel a bit lazy doing it, but you know what? If it gets people to see our point of views, I'll keep doing it. But yeah, Dingo, if you're watching this, I'd love to have a conversation on mass immigration. You can send me a message on Twitter. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Check out the Discord, check out the other videos, and I'll see you maybe in the next one.